Good afternoon. I'm John Amodio, Chairman of SCORE Staten Island. I want to welcome you today to a webinar, Independent Contractor or Employee. Do you know the difference? It is being sponsored by Richmond County Savings Bank, SCORE of Staten Island, and it's being done in collaboration with Doreen and Inserra, CPA, PC, and in the Independent Association of Accountants of Staten Island. We have with us two excellent, truly excellent presenters. Karen Hall, who is Human Resources Consultant at PAYCHEX, and Doreen Inserra, who is President of Doreen Inserra CPA, PC. May I have the next screen, please? The information about today's webinar is noted on the top of this page. This is the CPE, the numbers if you're going to be asking for CPEs. They will also be indicated on the questionnaire that you'll receive at the end of the webinar. There's a few things you need to know. First of all, your line is going to be muted. Secondly, I'd like you to please use the Q&A versus the chat. You will receive a copy of the slides, and the recording will be sent to all the attendees. At the end of this webinar, you're going to receive two surveys. One is going to be the survey that needs to be returned for anyone who's looking for CE or CPE credits. It will include a space for you to include 3 keywords that will be presented during the webinar. When that is received, you will then be issued your certificate. Anyone who is getting this free, there's a second questionnaire that will be coming very shortly after the first one that will be, we're asking you to return, and we would like to hear from you as to how you felt about the webinar today. SCORE is here to help small businesses grow, thrive, and we are been using webinars instead of workshops because of the pandemic that occurred, but it looks like we may wind up using webinars into the future as well. But we will be starting to do some workshops as well in 2023, so people will be able to come for live presentations. I'd like to now just point you to who the two speakers are. If you would get to the next slide, please, Karen. In your package, you're going to see this slide about Karen Hall. She, I think you're going to find, is quite knowledgeable and helpful in what the subject matter. And the next slide shows Doreen and Sarah and some of her qualifications. All that being said, I'd like to, at this point in time, turn this webinar over to Karen Hall. Karen, if you would, please.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody. In a second, I'm just going to take myself off of video so I can focus. There we go. So welcome to the Independent Contractor or Employee Seminar. How do you know? As John said, this is a PAYCHEX HR Services Seminar for small businesses. A couple of things to get out of the way. This PAYCHEX seminar is for general informational purposes only. It should not be considered legal advice or interpreted as legal opinion of any specific facts or circumstances. We encourage you to consult with legal counsel concerning your own situation or for any specific legal questions you may have. So, classifying your workers. Independent contractors and employees are not the same and it's important that you, as a business owner or manager, understand the differences. It's equally important to understand that worker classification laws exist at a federal, state, and local levels. In the early 1900s, Congress adopted the employee independent contractor distinction to define the coverage of New Deal era statutes that were designed to protect workers. Employee versus independent contractor status determinations have frequently been the subject of litigation, as well as regulations and legislation ever since. Where legal rights and protections are concerned, the differences between employee and independent contractors in American tax, labor, and employment law is monumental. Employees are protected by numerous statutes, such as state workers' compensation laws, the National Labor Relations Act, unemployment insurance laws, anti-discrimination laws, and wage and hour laws. Individuals may not be covered under employment laws where they do not meet the definition of employee under the applicable law. Determining whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor is not an easy thing to do and should not be taken lightly. It is further complicated by the fact that worker classification may be defined differently under different laws and enforced differently by different government agencies. A worker's classification potentially affects payroll, wages, taxes, and who's responsible for paying those taxes, eligibility for workers' compensation and unemployment insurance benefits, eligibility for company benefits, and protection under federal, state, and local laws. So during this seminar, we will review some applicable definitions of employee and independent contractor, review employer or business owner responsibilities, discuss how to determine worker classification, review misclassification concerns and consequences, and review some common mistakes employers make. So, what is an employee? The determination of a worker's classification cannot be made based on any one factor, as different agencies use different criteria. For example, the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, generally considers anyone who performs services for a business to be an employee if the business can control what will be done and how it will be done. This is generally the case when an employer allows a worker the freedom to make certain decisions and act upon them. The IRS maintains that the employer still retains the right to control the details of how the service was performed. So to illustrate this a little bit, I'm going to give you a scenario. So think only about those IRS criteria I just said as we go through this. Debbie Smith is a salesperson employed on a full-time basis by Bill Blue, an auto detailer. She works 6 days a week and is on duty in Bill's showroom on certain assigned days and times. She appraises trade-ins, but her appraisals are subject to the sales manager's approval. Lists of prospective customers belong to the dealer. She has to develop leads and report results to the sales manager. Because of her experience, she requires only minimal assistance in closing and financing sales and in other phases of her work. She is paid a commission and is eligible for prizes and bonuses offered by Bill. Bill also pays the cost of health insurance and group term life insurance for Debbie. So ask yourself, is Debbie an employee? Well, once again, thinking only about those IRS criteria, Debbie is likely an employee of the company for a number of reasons. A general rule is that anyone who performs services for you is your employee if you can control what will be done and how it will be done. As we discuss the details of making this determination later in the seminar, think back to the scenario and which factors support the classification of Debbie as an employee. In an employer-employee relationship, the employer is responsible for withholding income tax and a portion of Social Security and Medicare taxes for employees. As an employer, you must also pay Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment taxes on the wages you pay your employees. Most employers also have to pay Social Security and unemployment tax.
Karen,
Employers, yes.
I'm going to give the first keyword because we have attendees on here who are looking for credit. You're going to get 3 keywords. You need to write them down and then put them on your survey when you return them. And they're part of Karen's presentation. So the first keyword is employee. Employee. And you saw that on the prior slide when she talked about what is an employee. Thank you, Karen.
No problem. Employers are also required to issue Forms W-2 annually to employees and report employee wages quarterly on the Form 941. Form W-2 is a statement that must be prepared each year that details an employee's total gross earnings, Social Security earnings, Medicare earnings, and federal, state, and local taxes for the employee. This form must be provided to employees no later than the end of January with information from the previous calendar year. Depending on company policy, employers may be required to provide certain fringe benefits, such as health insurance and paid vacations to employees. Employers must also comply with all applicable federal, state, and local statutes designed to protect covered employees, such as wage and hour laws, leave laws, etc. So some business owner responsibilities. As a business owner who uses independent contractors, consider the following best practices. Complete an assessment to determine worker classifications. Such an assessment should look at all of the applicable laws and regulations that the employer is covered by. Many employers consult with legal counsel if they're not sure an individual can be classified as an independent contractor. A written agreement. You may wish to have a written agreement detailing the terms of your relationship with each independent contractor. An independent contractor agreement or contract, although neither required nor definitive for purposes of classification, might include the following information: a description of the services provided, payment for services, the relationship of the parties, work product ownership, intellectual property, confidentiality and security of information, and terms surrounding a termination of the relationship. A best practice to consider is an agreement that includes clear expectations detailing the job to be done rather than the manner with which it is to be performed, as well as the specific timeline for the completion of services. Consulting with legal counsel is recommended when drafting an independent contractor agreement. Documentation and record keeping. This is also important when managing an independent contractor relationship. Keep records regarding the independent contractors that you may use for your business and have these records readily available in the event of an audit. To help with this, consider keeping the written agreement for services, all invoices for services, business cards, and proof of insurance in a common folder.
Karen,
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
The question is, in a place like an accounting firm where an employee is designated as an independent contractor, so they're in the accounting firm, but they're being paid as an independent contractor. If the firm can still tell the person what to work on, where to go, and when to do the work, did that firm violate the law you just described?
Potentially. Like I said, there's not one factor that that makes that determination. But what you just told me kind of tells that the business is controlling what that person does and how they're doing it.
Correct. And we sort of had a discussion about this prior to going online, was if the firm is hiring a specialist or an expert that is not, and that firm is not doing that work, then that to me would be an independent contractor agreement.
Yes, something outside of their regular business. So either a specialty service they're providing, you know, not on a regular basis, or something that really has nothing to do with their business.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, so how do you make the determination? So IRS guidelines, according to the IRS guidelines, an individual is likely an independent contractor if the payer has the right to control or direct only the results of the work and not what will be done and how it will be done, what we were just discussing, right? The earnings of a person who is working as an independent contractor are subject to self-employment tax. Refer to the IRS website for more details on the self-employment tax. IRS common law rules. The Internal Revenue Service and courts generally look at a variety of facts in determining worker status. The IRS Common Law Employee Control Standard groups facts within 3 primary categories: behavioral control, financial control, and the relationship of the parties. The important point to remember is that you must consider all of those facts in making a determination, as not one individual fact provides that answer. In determining whether the person providing the service is an employee or an independent contractor, all information that provides evidence of the degree of control and independence must be considered, including all of these. So the extent to which the worker services are an integral part of the business, the permanency of the relationship, the amount of the worker's investment in facilities and equipment, the nature and degree of control by the principal, the worker's opportunities for profit and loss, the level of all skills required in performing the job.
So Karen,
Yes.
I just have another comment off that question, which was if the company used the technique and then dismissed that person. In other words, they were a sub of an accounting firm or an independent contractor of an accounting firm, and then later dismissed them and using that as a way to do it. It still doesn't change things if that person is being controlled by the firm and they just use that technique to easily de-hire them, let's put it that way, or dismiss them, then it doesn't matter. Correct?
It doesn't matter. And that's actually where a lot of businesses get into trouble, because a lot of employees don't understand the distinction between a 1099 and W-2. And I have seen it where people are classified, or workers are classified as 1099. They get dismissed and they go file for unemployment. And that has prompted audits because this person obviously didn't understand that relationship. And it is dangerous for businesses to do that. It's not an easy way out of employment laws and employer responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
So let's dig a little bit more into making this determination, okay? So behavioral. Does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his job? Financial. Are the business aspect of the worker's job controlled by the employer? These include things like how the worker is paid, whether the expenses are reimbursed, and who provides the tools and supplies, etc. And then the type of the relationship. Is there a written contract or employee benefit type in place? For example, a pension plan, insurance, vacation pay. Will the relationship continue, and is the work performed a key aspect of the business? Businesses must weigh all of these factors when determining whether a worker is an employee or independent contractor. Some factors may indicate that the worker is an employee, while other factors point to the fact that the worker is an independent contractor. There is no magic number or set of factors that makes the worker an employee or independent contractor. And no one factor stands alone in making this determination. Also, factors which are relevant in one situation may not be relevant in another. Something to keep in mind is that state laws vary as well. Each state may have its own regulations related to determining work classification under specific laws, which include wage and hour laws, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation insurance.
Karen, should we bring up the some of the state issues at this time, going back to the prior slide?
Sure. Do you want to talk about any of the New York State specific ones?
Well, I had a question earlier that asked about some specific state issues of whether they're going to be presented. And for example, for New York State, since we're in this state, January 1st, 2022, now the new hire reporting must get information from existing businesses with independent contractor arrangement contracts in excess of $2,500 that need to be sent into the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance Previously, the new hire reporting requirement applied to only employees. So that's a big change this year. Is that something that you go over, or you want me to continue with the next state?
It's really not something that I go into, but I think that whenever there's, more specific state or local laws, sometimes they're painted with a very broad stroke to capture all employers. So the people that are doing the right thing and the people that are doing the wrong thing. In my experience, I have seen a lot of people that are classified as 1099s that should be W-2s. And so to me, that sounds like a way of making it a little bit more administratively difficult for employers to have lots of 1099s.
Okay, so if we have time at the end, we'll go over a couple of other states.
So let's talk about some misclassification concerns. Misclassification can result or may result in civil and criminal penalties for your company, and they can be expensive. So you can be responsible for back federal taxes, which would be up to 1.5% of wages paid for failing to withhold that employee income tax, 20% of an employee's share of FICA, 100% of your share of employer taxes, 100% of FUTA taxes, liability for unpaid overtime and back pay and benefits, and benefit contributions, which could include 401k. If you are found to have failed to provide independent contractors, for those making more than $600 a year with that Form 1099 NEC, you may also face double federal penalties. And if you're found to be intentionally misclassifying employees, your company may be subject to even greater fines and penalties. So in addition to facing fines and penalties at the federal level, your company may also face fines and penalties at the state level. Some states may be more aggressive enforcing misclassification than others. In my experience, New York is a bit more aggressive in enforcing misclassification issues than other states that I cover. So we'll talk about it a little more at the end, but for more state guidance, we do encourage you to visit the irs.gov website or state websites or your own legal counsel for additional information. So some common mistakes. First one, only considering one or just a couple of factors. Employers should not base work classification on one or two factors, but review all aspects. For example, basing the relationship on a signed contract or the fact that a worker does assignments or projects for more than one company may not be sufficient. Not following standard guidelines. Don't just do something because another business owner has done it. Refer to the IRS guidelines, the US DOL fact sheet number 13, the administrator's interpretation number 215-1, as well as applicable state guidelines, and even consider consulting with legal counsel when attempting to classify your workers. This is one of my favorites, taking advice from friends. Remember to only take advice from a reputable source when trying to determine worker status. This might include your CPA or legal counsel. You can't say, for example, that starting someone as an independent contractor during onboarding to save unemployment taxes because a friend did it is okay. That is not a defense. Going is another common mistake. Failing to consult with legal counsel when you're unsure about a classification or when you're creating a binding agreement for the independent contractor could come back and bite you in the tuchus later on. Not double checking documentation. Always confirm that an independent contractor has his own workers' compensation insurance. Letting the worker make the determination. Classifying a worker as an independent contractor because the individual asked you to is not a defense. Even if the worker signs a written agreement, the business is still responsible for proper classification of workers. Treating independent contractors as employees. So I have seen this quite a bit over the years. So some examples, providing an offer letter or issuing an employee handbook to a 1099, providing a benefit package similar to what employees receive. So that could include access to health insurance, paid time off, paid holidays, or leave benefits. Retaining independent contractors for lengthy periods of time. What's lengthy? I think anything over a year is pretty lengthy. Having an individual perform the same or similar services as an employee, but classifying him as an independent contractor because you don't think you'll need him permanently. If you have two people doing the same job and one is a 1099 and one is a W-2, there are issues. The last one is also something that I see quite frequently, using the wrong language. When using independent contractors, you should never refer to them as 1099 employees. Form 1099 NEC is a government tax form issued to independent contractors, not employees. Also avoid the terms hiring and firing when referring to independent contractors. Independent contractors are neither hired nor fired. Their contracts are simply fulfilled or terminated. Avoiding some of these common pitfalls can help you avoid liability when classifying workers. The conservative approach when in doubt about a worker's classification may be to classify the individual as an employee and comply with all applicable laws in an effort to avoid the potential back taxes, fines, and penalties associated with independent contractor misclassification. As an employer or business owner, you may have a defense or safe harbor against these fines and penalties if there was a reasonable basis for the determination that you made. Examples of a reasonable basis may include judicial precedents, published rulings with respect to the taxpayer, or a letter ruling to the taxpayer. Past IRS audits. Note, this is only applicable if there is no penalty assessment assessed related to the treatment of the individuals holding substantially similar positions in the business. Prior audits must have included an examination for employment tax purposes of whether the worker or anyone in a substantially similar position should be treated as employee, or a long-standing recognized practice of a significant portion of the industry.
Karen, at this time, we're going to do another keyword, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, since we've been talking about employees and independent contractors, the word is independent. So the second word is independent. We need all three words on the survey submitted at the end of this presentation. Thank you. Independent.
Employers or business owners may be denied safe harbor protections if they inconsistently classify workers who are doing the same task, or if the employer has not filed the appropriate tax forms consistent with the treatment of the worker as an independent contractor. Employers are therefore encouraged to treat all individuals considered to be independent contractors consistently and file required tax forms. Consult your own legal counsel for more guidance. So some resources. So the IRS website is a valuable resource. If you don't find what you're looking for there, there are some other resources that are available. I've mentioned it many times as we went through, right? Your legal counsel, an accountant, or a tax professional. If you are on PAYCHEX HR services, or there's a bunch of them that are out there and you have access to an HR generalist, I would encourage you to speak with them. And here's a ton of other resources that you can go to. You're going to get copies of these slides, so don't worry about writing any of this down. So we've come to the end of that. What questions have come in?
This next question is an offshoot of what we were talking about with regards to whether you are an employee or an independent contractor. Working, let's say, for example, in the accounting firm, as we talked about earlier, if they are hired as an independent contractor, but then should be an employee, and as you said, easily then release that person because they are an independent contractor. If that person signed an independent contractor agreement, could they get a determination later from the Department of Labor that they were in fact an employee?
Yes, an employee can't sign away their legal rights in any circumstance. So in this case, if they were an employee, it's not their fault that the employer misclassified them. So yes, they would still have a case, even if they signed that they were an independent contractor.
Should they apply for unemployment, or should they first go to the Department of Labor and make an appeal?
So if they believe that they were misclassified, they would have to go through the DOL to start with and then go through unemployment. There would be no unemployment taxes associated with them until they had that classification deemed wrong by the DOL.
I experienced on the federal level that there is a form SSA that I had prepared for a client that felt they were misclassified, in that their payroll taxes were not withheld, et cetera, et cetera. And that form, when you submit that to the IRS, they can make a determination as well on the federal level with regards to that. Then I would guess that would help your case in submitting to the Department of Labor as well, because they're two different entities.
Yes. Yeah, it's actually a form that I have directed some of my clients when they're not quite sure, what it is, that you can ask, you can ask somebody to tell you, so you don't get into trouble. So if you don't want to use the legal counsel or an accountant or an HR generalist, you can go straight to an agency and ask them. But you better follow what they say. If they tell you that person's an employee, you better classify them as an employee.
Right. And we talked about the fact that IRS and the Department of Labor have two different sets of rules with regards to that, correct?
Yes, they're similar. They're very, very similar. The DOL has a broader look at it, I guess, than the IRS. The IRS, I think, is a little bit more intricate in their assessment of it. Multifactorial might be the better way to think about it. But they're similar. They're very, very similar. But you can't look just at the DOL and say, well, under the DOL guidelines, this person is a 1099. You have to take both of those into consideration.
Right. Plus, it's also industry specific. We spoke about, let's say, for example, in New York, optical stores are exempt. So the doctors that are hired by the optical store to do the eye examination can be 1099s. Even though they may be coming in and being paid for a certain number of hours or in the schedule a certain number of days and consistent throughout the year. So that's one exemption. So they would need to look at their specific industry.
And it has to be a substantial part of that industry. And we have to understand that industries change, right? What we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, may not still be the common practice today. And so saying, well, we've been doing this for 30 years doesn't mean that it's okay to still be doing it. So you have to realize that those laws have, evolve and change.
Right. And then the other commonality or something, an easy way to determine this is if you are hiring, your business entity is hiring what you consider an independent contractor. Let's say they want to have them as independent contractors, but they're really doing the same type of activity that the business is doing. That's, I think, one of the biggest prongs that you have to watch out for. So we were having a conversation, let's say, about technicians. If a firm is a technician and they go out to various jobs and they're just hiring other technicians because one technician is not good enough to handle all the jobs, those would be more than likely employees, because that business would be supervising, directing them, and controlling them in their performance of their duties. Does that
right? And it's what they do as well. So yes, all those other things file in too. For me, it stops just with the initial piece that's what that business does.
Mhm.
So, you could take that same business and they decide to have their offices painted, but the painter is a 1099, right? I mean, that's
Mhm.
it has nothing
That's
to do with their business.
right. That's different. Also, you said you should have an independent contractor agreement. It should be an annual agreement. And it should specify the activities that they're responsible for and that they're going to control to get the outcome that you need as the business. So many of the states look at the activities of the independent contractor, right? For example, do they advertise on their own? I know when I represent clients with taxing authorities, they look right away to see if that independent contractor has their own insurance. That's one of the triggers. Do they have business cards? Is there a list that a business could use like that would help them to determine whether this is in fact an employee they're hiring or an independent contractor?
There is some on both the DOL and IRS. There's some of those basic things that we went over in this seminar as well. Just, who's controlling what, who's paying for what belongs to who's directing who. So if they're looking for a more extensive list, I believe the IRS is the best place. The IRS website's the best place.
And the big thing is that they should be offering services to other businesses, these independent contractors that you're hiring, as well as having their own equipment and their own assets.
Yeah, so when I go through this with my clients, generally, I want to know to start with. So at that top tier, what are they doing? How is this related to your business? How long is this going to last? Then the next tier down from that is, well, where are they doing this? Do you have anybody else that does this?
Mm-hmm.
Are they using their stuff, their list, their supplies, or are you giving them all of that? Are you scheduling them, or do they make their own schedule? Do they meet weekly with you for you to tell them what they're going to do the following week? Like, we start digging down further and further and further into that. And how long is it going to last? To me, that's one of the biggest ones that are out there. When I hear that somebody's had 1099s for years, that's a warning bell for me. That sounds like something that's pretty integral to your business. It sounds like a position that is most likely a W-2.
Okay, so I have three questions here. The first one is state specific. So this question says, there was a major case decided in New Jersey about this issue, which I'm expecting is the employee versus independent contractor issue. Also, there are new regs proposed, and they just extended the comment time. If you need the New Jersey case, let me know, he's saying. You can let him know. And I'm sure that if anyone has questions about specific cases, our contact information is on there. I don't think PAYCHEX provides that information. So if anyone has questions about that, they can email me. Now, looking at New Jersey, the state of New Jersey defines an employee as any person working for an employer, which is very vague. Okay, except for those that can be classified as independent contractors. And I think that's so interesting, because if a lame person was to read that, they still wouldn't understand whether that person should be an employee or an independent contractor. But if they do have an independent contractor, New Jersey does want the 1099 NEC filing, as they do the W-2s. So that's a way for them to get access to that reporting information. They also have what's called an ABC test, and they look at whether the employee, the individual, has been and will continue to be free from control or direction over the performance of work. It always comes to that, the control issue. The work is either outside the usual course of business, we talked about that, for which service is performed, and the individual is currently or customarily engaged in an independent activity. established trade, occupation, profession, or business. So were they customarily in that arena? That's something that New Jersey will look at, and I'm sure that case would cover. And of course, so what is the misclassification problems in New Jersey? The employer would have to possibly do back pay for unpaid minimum wage, overtime, failure to pay prevailing wage, etc. Entitlement to the benefits of that independent contractor who is now an employee. Workers can be awarded up to 5% of the worker's gross earnings over the past 12 months. That's a significant impact. And reinstatement or correction of discriminatory actions. So you have to be very careful in this area. The next question is—
Let me just,
yeah, go
Doreen,
ahead.
let me just touch on one piece of that. So it says about the new regs proposed and they're extending the comment time. Yes, so it's the DOL. It changed very slightly in March of this year, to the point where I don't think that anybody has really changed their classification. And what they're the administration right now is looking to changing it back. So it's in the comment period. It's not any real big change that's out there, just putting it back where the DOL would look a little bit deeper into it, a little bit more, less broad, more specific questions that they would want answered in determining 1099 versus W-2. So
Okay, great.
stay tuned. It's out there in the comment period right now.
Okay, very good. The next question I have here is, if I hire someone off the street to do painting in my apartment that I rent out, what information do I need? And if the contract state worker pays all of his own taxes, that contracted worker pays his own taxes, is that something where I'd have to worry about an employee versus independent contractor? This is a landlord.
Yeah, to me, that if this is just for one day or here and there when an apartment turns over, to me, at face value, that looks like a 1099. The nature of that business, and I'm kind of a suspicious person to start with, is I want to make sure that that person has their own insurance. I see all sorts of horrible things happening with, with a physical job like that. So that to me would be most important, is that they have their own insurance.
And interestingly, on the tax side of it, as a CPA preparing the returns for the property owners, there are questions on there, whether you have issued 1099s or not. And generally, if you're living in that two-family, you're excluded or exempt from doing that. But if you own it in an LLC, or you have a triple net lease type of commercial property, you are required to issue 1099s based on the threshold. And that would be 1099 next in those cases, because those have been separated out from the miscellaneous 1099s like DIV and interest, etc. Okay, so that's, here's the next one. If you are reimbursed for travel expenses, hotel, etc., should that be billed separately or reported differently or considered income? I guess if that was a W-2 question.
Well, it gets my spidey senses up. If this is a 1099 and we're reimbursing those things, that's a little scary to me, because to me, that would be built in that 1099 contract, what expenses are going to be covered by that total fee that you're paying that person. But that's a whole separate way. Right. As far as the tax portion of it, that would be you. Is that considered income?
If it is a W-2, there's going to be reporting separately in box 14 with regards to that. But I'm thinking it's an independent contractor issue. So if you're running a business and you're trying to get reimbursed for that, you have to actually put that as part of your proposal. So you create the proposal, and then you're going to do like a percentage of completion billing or an installment billing based on the engagement letter or the contract, the independent contract. You're not going to put that specifically in the invoice, because then again, it looks like you are an employee as opposed to an independent contractor controlling your own business. Okay, the next one we have is in the delivery business, there are independent classified drivers that do work for many different companies. as well as negotiate the rate for numerous jobs. Do you feel that is proper to classify them as independent contractors?
So there's a lot of movement with delivery and a lot of different ways that people are classifying and being challenged, right?
Mhm.
To determine whether or not they are a 1099, I would need more information and I would have to dig deeper into that. Just because it's done that way in some parts of the industry doesn't mean that it's the right part of your business. You know, I would go back to the very first piece, the integral part, right? If your job is delivering stuff, then those
Again, it goes back
people,
to industry specific, I think, because in the
Right,
newspaper
right.
business, let's say, they have an exemption again, where they can have 1099 for drivers. It doesn't mean that that's what all of the businesses are going to do. But there is an exemption for that.
right. And I think part of the delivery business is so huge. Are we talking FedEx deliveries? Or are we talking DoorDash deliveries? You know, there's a whole bunch within there.
Right. So FedEx, generally their employees, UPS as well, Uber, you're an independent right now, but there are cases.
Right now.
Mhm. Yep.
Isn't it California where that's being challenged still?
Correct. Okay. Let me just see what this question is. What is preferable for reimbursing expenses for an independent contractor? A continuous monthly allowance to the contractor or direct reimbursing expenses to the contractor? I think we talked about that when we talked about the independent contractor agreement and the proposal. And the
Yes.
it being annual and what it's going to entail and what it's going to cover. When you come up with your total amount, let's say it's $10,000, you're going to bill accordingly based on the action items completed on that job.
Yes.
And that should have whatever expenses you're incurring in there as part of that. If a design agency is using a freelancer on a consistent basis for overflow projects that are the same or similar to the majority of all agencies' projects, and the freelancer is using their own equipment to work and doing this on their own time at their own location, would that qualify as an independent contractor? So you have a design agency using freelancers or a freelancer on a consistent basis for overflow.
Well, yes. So it sounds like they're doing what everybody else is doing. So that's one thing that I would question. On a consistent basis would be the next one. So to me, that is kind of the time that's there. It sounds more to me maybe like a temporary employment relationship as opposed to, or a per diem employment relationship as opposed to a 1099.
Okay. And in a lot of these cases, the insurance issue is very important. Generally, if you're going to be working with larger companies, they are going to want to see, depending on the type of work you're doing, a workman's comp certificate. And if you're hiring these independents, you're going to end up paying for them if they don't have their insurance certificates, because the insurance company is going to ask for that as part of your audit of your business. So down the road, you're going to end up getting snagged if the person is really an employee as well with that. Next question, how can you protect yourself if an independent contractor forgets to or refuses to supply a 1099? It's not really about protecting yourself. You need to report the income either way, 1099 or not. The business is then going to end up getting a penalty if in audit they are found that they had not issued the 1099s. Correct, Karen?
Yes, the 1099 is the business's responsibility to issue that.
And we're talking about a 1099 NEC, which is now different from the 1099 miscellaneous. 1099 miscellaneouses are due at the end of February with the annual transmittal, summary transmittal, while the 1099 NEC is due to the recipient, the IRS, the state agencies that require it. For example, Connecticut doesn't require it, but Pennsylvania does, New Jersey does. Those would be at the end of January. My condo that I rent out is covered by liability insurance in case my independent contractor is injured. So that's what they were told by the insurance company. I mean, we're not insurance brokers or experts. Do you want to comment on that?
So what, I guess I need to know, what is this independent contractor doing in the condo, I think you said?
Yeah, it
Are
says my
they
condo
just
that I rent
coming
out
in-
is covered by liability insurance in case my independent contractor is injured.
So, to go back to the other one, is this a painter that's going in, that's painting or cleaning in between tenants? I guess I would want to know.
The homeowner policies and generally the property policies don't have workers' compensation insurance. So you would have to get your own workers' compensation policy for workers in your property. For independent contractors, do you know where they can get workers' comp insurance? Are there vendors? I don't think that's part of this presentation.
Yeah, there's any number of vendors out there. If they just Googled workman's comp, they can find any insurance agency that is out there. I mean, I know PAYCHEX, we have through our insurance agency, we offer it. So there's probably hundreds upon hundreds that they could get an answer or get a quote from.
Okay. Can you briefly cover some of the industries where 1099 contractors is typical? I'm particularly interested to see if archivists are generally represented as subcontractors. Again, that's a specific industry question.
Yeah, I wouldn't know off the top of my head. That's something that I would have to really, really research and dig into. And it may be different from state to state as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, at this time,
Yes.
we're running out of time.
Well, we have to do one more keyword, John.
One more question. I mean,
One
one
more
more
keyword.
keyword.
Because we need it to be on 50 minutes for those that are looking for credit.
Oh, you've done that already.
Okay, so the key word is misclassification. That's what we've been talking about, misclassification. So we need the 3 keywords on the survey to submit. In order to get credits, you need to be on the presentation 50 minutes or more, which we're at. And I think we covered all the questions here.
Thank you. Karen, could you move us to the last slide, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the questions that was posed during the presentation today, and you wiped out all the answers here already, but we have someone who has worked with us in the past at the SCORE, an attorney by the name of Kevin McKiernan. He also had some cases that he took care of in New Jersey and is familiar with some of the New Jersey matters. If you feel you want to reach out to him as well as reaching out to SCORE or through SCORE, please do so. If I remember rightly, his email was K McKiernan at Kiernan.com.
If he's on, he could email it out again.
Yeah. Now, this last slide is saying really to all of you, thank you, and letting you know some of the things about SCORE and how you can contact us. Besides reaching out to us, we're going to have Doreen tell you a little bit about the Independent Association of Accountants and how you could reach out to them. And also the next webinar that we will be putting on, that will be giving out CPE credits and CE credits, is going to be in December.